25 years I was a pilot and I flew all over the world, and now I create the view and the feelings that I had flying. I'm Matt Dampier. I'm a resident at the Carlton factory and I paint aerial landscapes. So I flew for about 25 years, and then the last plane that I flew was, I was flying internationally, and that was on the Boeing 787. Yeah, I grew up in the UK, and then when I was 5, I moved to Cyprus, back to the UK again, and then a few years later moved to Oman. I think we moved out there, I was like 11 until like 15, something like that. Fortunately, there were no high schools, so I missed a lot of high school. Came back, I think I did my last year in high school in the UK, and then I had the travel bug, and that was it, man. I wanted to go travel. I kind of fell into working with horses. You know, my dad worked with horses. Like when we lived in Oman, he was an advisor to the Omani army, but at the same time, he was a traditional cavalry officer. So now when you think of that, you think of a guy in a tank. But back then, he was on a horse with a sword, which kind of seems like crazy because this was like the 80s, right? A lot of the areas that they used to go and patrol was in the mountain range called the Jebel, and they couldn't get tracked vehicles up there, so they used horses. Life and growing up, it was always a part of my life when I was young. I naturally kind of fell into that, right? Going to work with my dad. And then I used that job and the knowledge that I had from working with horses see a little bit of the world. So I traveled around, I worked in Greece, I went back to Cyprus for a year, I worked there, the Netherlands, Florida. I was just doing it because it came easy, right? And it was at that point where, you know, I was just sat in the bush one day because I had this stupid job they gave me. I had to clear some section of bush, and I was like, you know, I'm gonna do what I always wanted to do when I was a kid, and that was either make art or fly planes, because when I was a kid I drew and painted airplanes. Yeah, art school was not really an option because my mum and dad were like, yeah, no, that ain't happening. It was like the early 90s at this point, you know, and they were kind of old school. They grew up during the war, right? So then I was like, okay, I'm gonna train to be a pilot, and then that kind of ended up bringing me to Canada. It was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it, and yeah, it became a part of me. It's who I was, you know. People introduced me as, oh, here's Matt, he's a pilot. And it was an incredible job, and I loved it. I mean, but there were times that were difficult as well. You know, like you're away from your family a lot, you miss Christmases, you miss birthdays with the kids, you know. And it can be lonely at times, you know. You spend a lot of time, you know, in hotel rooms. But the one thing that I still miss to this day is the view. You know, that is something I will never get over. And that is something that I try and capture now. Briefly something, but in a nutshell, it was a really strange occurrence. It was like lots of people made lots of mistakes, and yeah, it was just a very difficult time. And while I was going through that, I also lost my sister, who I was very close to. So it was a lot of kind of trauma kind of stacked up. Yeah, and I think it was at that point that I turned to art, and I just started kind of like sketching again, you know. I don't know why I picked up an old sketchbook and a pencil, because I probably hadn't done that since playing, you know. But I did, and I just felt so at peace and so calm. And I thought to myself, like, wow, wouldn't it be incredible if I could just do this all the time, you know? Because at this point, that whole PTSD and all the mental health stuff had kind of manifested itself into anxiety, and then finally into migraines. And for some reason, they don't want you flying a plane when you can't see. So yeah, suddenly I had all this time on my hands, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna go back to art school, or I'm gonna go to art school. Not long after it came to an end, I saw this opportunity here in the Carlton factory, and I'd been here once, and I was like, you know, I was like, wow, if you could be a part of that, like that would be something else. Yeah. So as soon as I saw, you know, the opportunity for residency, I was like, I got to get on that, you know. Yeah, it's funny because like for the first couple of weeks, I was like, there's no way. Like, there's no way they picked me. I kept thinking someone was going to come through that door and be like, oh, Matt, actually, we made a horrible mistake. And then when that kind of wore off and it was like, okay, it is me, it was like, shit, now I actually have to produce what I said I was going to produce in my application. So now I got to buckle down and actually do some work, so.
To go back to Sheridan quick, would you recommend people go to art school?
And I think, honestly, it comes down to the individual. So for me, yes. I need someone like cracking that whip, you know what I mean? Like, and having those assignments constantly set, you know, I need to kind of feel the pressure in order to kind of perform. And I think maybe that kind of comes from, you know, that background in aviation where I'm constantly being tested and examined and probed and, you know. Yeah, yeah, it just seemed a natural fit for me. So yeah, I would definitely recommend Sheridan. Like you don't want to put too much pressure on yourself, you know, because then once you do that, you take all the fun out of it, and then it's a job then, right? That's what I actually first started painting, you know, like I wasn't really ready to dive into aviation, you know. I'd left that behind, and it was still difficult for me to talk about at the time because it was a whole other lifestyle that I missed. And it was, you know, I really felt like I'd lost my identity. But going to art school and going through the process of art really kind of helps me deal with that. And I realized that, you know, I don't have to be Matt the pilot, I can just be Matt, you know, and like, that's a big thing. You know, you don't have to really identify with one thing, you can be whoever you want to be. And you know, art really helped me get there. And I started with science fiction because, I don't know, I think it's escapism, right? You can really lose yourself in something like that. It's the same with fantasy or anything else. So I started doing this kind of world building thing, you know, creating like spaceships and all these different things, just as this distraction, you know, and I really got into it and I really loved it. And it probably wasn't until my final year in art school where I really kind of started to turn things around and look at my past and how that kind of connects to my art and kind of where I am now, essentially. I think the biggest thing that I've learned, and you know, this isn't just through art, but like maybe 50 years being on this planet, you know, is that like, you gotta be true to yourself. You know, you gotta kind of listen to this and stick with this. And when it comes to art, create what's in here. Create what you wanna create. Like, so many people worry about, you know, or fall into the trap of making something that they think other people will like. You can't do that. You know, because you're not going to enjoy the process, and then the art isn't going to be as good as it could be. If you paint what you're passionate about, it'll be brilliant, and the right people will love it.